Hi, and welcome to Cloudeight Summit. You will see the Powershell and MS Graph API demystified session. We will start with a short introduction of myself. So my name is Michael Seidel. I'm from Austria and Europe. I'm a Microsoft MVP since 2015. I'm doing automation since more than 10 years. Also the founder of Automator, a self-service portal for Microsoft automation. And maybe you already read some of my blog posts on TechGuy.at or seen my GitHub repositories. And of course, you can get in contact with me on LinkedIn. So what do we expect today? First, the introduction checked is done. So we'll go on and talk about MS Graph API. What is it? Why should you use it? And how should you use it? So we will have also a lot of demos and so on, but we make sure that to understand what is Graph API, how does Microsoft see it, maybe how I see it, a little bit different. Of course, very important how to authenticate with Graph API and to use it. And then we have a few examples to see what use cases you can do and how easy it is to write, and so you can lose the fear of using PowerShell and REST APIs or Graph API. The Q&A, you can post your questions in the chat during the whole session. You should be able to unmute your mic. You also can ask me questions. You can do it during the session. You can do it at the end. Whenever you have any questions or something else, just let me know. So let's get this started. What is MS Graph API? So that's a picture from the Microsoft Docs or Learn platform, as it's called right now. Microsoft is seeing it as a Microsoft 365 platform and and an API to those elements. I need to add here a little bit. I see it also for the Microsoft Azure cloud, and for me, it is one API to the cloud, of course, to the Microsoft cloud. Also, Microsoft is seeing that in the second chapter in the documentation. It is one API to all, or it should be one API to all cloud services. So don't have to use those API for this and this API for that and the other API for anything else. It should be one API to the cloud, to the Microsoft cloud. So it is Azure, it is Office 365, it is Microsoft 365. Everything from Microsoft in the cloud, you can already, or you should be able to request or create or manipulate in the near future. So Microsoft is doing a good job here. There is a huge product group in the background. They are doing a great job. A lot of enhancements are coming in the next weeks or month. Make sure you sign up for the Ignite in, I think, two weeks. There should be a lot of news and all around the Microsoft Graph API. So it will be the future single API to Microsoft Cloud. So that's definitely the fact. And why should you use the Microsoft Graph API? Of course, it is the single API to the cloud, as we talked already. Today we focus on PowerShell. Why should you use it for your PowerShell scripts? One reason can be or should be you don't need any additional PowerShell modules to use MS Graph API. So for example, to create a user in Azure AD, to create a mailbox in Office 365, to create a Teams, there are 3 different PowerShell modules to do this. Or you use the standard commandlet invoke REST method, what is included since PowerShell day 1, I think. And you can do all of those things with Graph API and PowerShell without any module. And why is it so important to maybe have no module? There are maybe some environments you cannot import a module. So maybe there is a limited access to the internet from that machine, from that server. So you need to install it manually, but how to keep updated and so on. But also there are some environments that don't support each PowerShell modules and so on. So there are some reasons why to not use the PowerShell module. Graph API works on-prem or in the cloud. So if you write your PowerShell script on your machine, on your server, run it on-prem, it will work. And the same code will work in the cloud, in Azure Automation, in Azure Functions, whatever. So where you can run a PowerShell script, it will work also with MS Graph API. So there is no difference. Maybe some models, there is a difference if they're on-prem or in the cloud and so on. In some cases, there are more functionalities over PowerShell models. In the past, there was that case for the Exchange PowerShell model and the Exchange Online PowerShell model. There are some functionality you can't do with the PowerShell model in your daily business. So you need to switch over to the Graph API in that case. It is an easy language. So yes, it is not just the command like new team or new mailbox. There are some more lines you need to write in the PowerShell script. But if you understand the schema and the idea behind the REST API or the Graph API, it is easy to use. And we see also the documentation on the Learn platform from Microsoft. You get everything you need to write your PowerShell scripts and use it with MS Graph API. As I said, today we talk about PowerShell and MS Graph API, but of course you can use it for all other development environments, scripting languages, development languages as you like, JavaScript or C# or whatever. It is a REST API, but you can use with all development environments you can imagine. Today, PowerShell. And as we said before, it will be, or it is already nearly one API to all Microsoft Cloud services. So start today, or start yesterday, not tomorrow, start today to use MS Graph API. And how to use it, MS Graph API? It's nothing different to other REST APIs. So if you worked with REST APIs before, you will be familiar with the Graph API. So you do a REST call, an HTTP call to the Microsoft Cloud. So it is HTTPS graph microsoft.com/v1.0. There are still, so Graph API is released in the version 1+0. There are still some endpoints only available in the beta state, for example, Endpoint Management or Intune, that stuff. But we have it we use them on some customers, and that's fine. They will be moved to V1 in the near future. But then, so that's the base URL, graph.microsoft.com v1+0, and then you decide what entity or what service you want to call. So do you want to do something with users, with groups, with teams, to do Azure Apps, Endpoint Manager, whatever, then the URL will be changed a little bit, but let's see that a little bit later. And then the most important thing is the method you talk to the REST API. So it is a get, a post, a patch, or a delete. So that's, for some people, that can be confusing, but it is very simple. To read something, you want to have a get. So get me something. If you want to create something new, you do a post or sometimes a put. If you want to update anything, you do a patch. You know it from your Windows PC or something like what you have. If you do an update, you do install patches. So that's maybe a relationship to that. And if you want to remove anything, for example, a user, you call the method delete. So that's the easiest one: get, post, put, patch, or delete. That's the 5 methods you have to use, or you need to use, if you want to work with REST API, or in our case, MS Graph API. To have an easier start and a little bit of GUI, and to see how all this works together, there is the Graph Explorer from the Microsoft. So we will see this in the demo then. You can see a little bit, so what URL can I use? What response do I get? Without, you can log in as your user, and then the authentication is done. So you don't need to focus on the details on the first step. You can just try a little bit and see the results. And everything you do with the REST API and the MS Graph API is done in JSON format. So get used to use JSON, how to use it with PowerShell, how to write your JSON code, and so on. So everything is done in JSON. And of course, authentication is very important. As you maybe know, Microsoft is deprecating the basic out in October, so in 1 week. So you will not be able to, for example, create any mailboxes anymore or talk to Office 365 without any Azure App registrations. So that is the way to authenticate against the cloud. So make an Azure App registration. That's the first part. Assign those Azure App registrations permissions. We see that in a little bit later. Create a client secret or upload a certificate for authentication for the handshake. Client secret is limited until for 2 years, and the certificate, it depends on your local environment, but it should also have a near expire date, because it makes no sense to have a certificate for 15 years or so. There is a reason that such secrets or certificate are expiring. So make sure you create a client secret or certificate, and then you add the permissions to that app registrations. And what can be what for the most users are confusing, there are delegated rights or application rights or permissions. We will see that in the next slide. What is the difference? One note here, I saw that Marcel Zehner has a session today at, I think, 4 p.m. He's talking about Azure apps. So if you want to see more and understand that Azure app thing better, make sure you visit his session. So now let's talk about those two different permission levels. There is a delegate right and an application right. Most of the permissions you can use can be done for delegated or for the application. The difference is, if you use application, there is no user identification. So you only have to use the Azure App ID, the secret, and the Azure App ID, the secret, and the tenant. The Azure App gets permissions. So for example, maybe on on-premise side, you can compare it to a service user. So you have a service user for your Exchange environment, and everything that user can be done in that application. So you assign rights to an application. So for example, that application is allowed to read all emails in your Office 365 tenant. That's huge, but everyone who has the ID, the secret, and the tenant can use that application and use the permission of that application. Okay, and then can read all emails in your whole tenant. Take care about this. The delegate thing is, this is used when a user needs to sign into the Azure cloud and want to use the API. So then the user permission is used to do anything in the cloud, not the app permission. The app is just to open the door and say hi to the cloud, but then the permissions from the signed in user is used to do all the stuff in the cloud. So for example, the app permission has access to all, the app registration has access to all mailboxes in the tenant, but the signed in user hasn't. So he has only rights to his mailbox, what is standard. The user is only able to read emails in his mailbox. So that's the difference. There are some endpoints in the Graph API and permissions which are only available for delegated permissions. We have one example later for Microsoft To Do. So that is limited to delegated permissions. So that user, what is running those automation, needs to have access to the to-do list or whatever he wants to do. And of course, what should I use? It depends. So it depends on your use case. It depends on what are you trying to achieve. So should it be something automated in the background without any user interaction or without any idea to provide this to a user, then usually it should be the application permission. But make sure only the user, only a very small amount of users get the credentials for those information, because everyone who gets that, you can do he can do all things that the application has permissions for. If you want to provide, for example, send an email with Graph API for your users, because you want to provide them any API to send emails over your Azure tenant. Usually you do it on SMTP and send those information over SMTP, provide them app registrations, delegated permission to send emails from their users with Graph API, for example. But of course, it depends. Okay, we've seen a lot of slides and we heard a lot of talk. Now we switch over to our demo. First of all, let me bring that over here. And we see the Graph Explorer first. So that's the Graph Explorer. Just Google or Bing Graph Explorer, and you will be here. You log in as your user, and then you authenticate it against the Graph API with the Graph Explorer. And then you can play around a little bit and see what's happening. So first thing that's pre-filled already, you see the graph.microsoft.com, what we see as a base URL, and then you see me. Okay, and the get. So we get anything. Just run that query, and we see I get from the logged in user, that's my user, I get the user details. So my email, my name, my preferred language, and so on. Of course, I can get my photo. I can just click here around, the URL is changing, and I see the run query, and then I see my photo. I can see my email, my messages, and then it should load all the messages I received in my mailbox. So that's something you can just try your URLs, hit the run, try something. And so that's an easy way if you haven't done anything with REST APIs or Graph API to start with. Of course, you can change this to something like users, different endpoint, and just name dot. It's one of our colleagues. And if I run that query, I see the details from Jasmine. So I get her email, her job title, her mail, and so on. So I see the job title is test and the mobile phone is something weird. So maybe we want to change this. So that's the Graph Explorer. If you are really new to Graph API, REST API, take this. You can write those URLs and play around a little bit without writing code and maybe have a typo or something like this. So it's a little bit easier to start with. If you don't know where to start, so maybe you want to have some user details, or you want to update a user. I haven't said that very often, but the documentation related to MS Graph API from Microsoft is really good. So in the past, for other products, maybe the documentation is not always the best, but for Graph API, you get everything you need. And this is very structured and all informations are the same. So what we see here to get a user, we see the get me or the get user ID. They always remove the base URL. So there's the graph.microsoft.com/v1 and so on. That's missed. But we see the method to get something. And we can do the me or the user's ID, what you saw in the Graph Explorer. And then we can use the ID or the UPN, the user principal name of the users, to get any information. So that's everything you need to know. And additionally, there is documented what permission type and what permissions the Azure app registration needs to execute that command. And that leads me to our demos and to see. So our first topic will be to update Jasmine's telephone number and job title. Okay, so how to do it? We see get user, we want to see the update user. So we need application rights, user read write all, user managed entities, and all directory read write all. Give me a few seconds, then we see where this leads us. And we have to do a patch and user's ID. So it's just the difference from to read something to update something is just the method get patch. Everything else is the same. Users/user principal name. So first of all, to start the first thing before we start with the PowerShell code, we need to create an Azure App registrations. Of course, I prepared this before, so it will not take that long. So I created the demo one Azure App registration. So give me 1 second to do a new registration. You type in a name and that's it. Okay, nothing more to do here. So let's back to demo Cloudeight. What you get from the from there is the application ID, the client ID, and the tenant ID. Next will be the secret, what we talked. So you need something to authenticate with. So I already created the secret. Make sure when you create a new secret, so I will do it just for testing. You can configure the expire date. Make sure you copy the secret now. It's now hidden from a browser, but make sure you copy it right now. If you leave the site and browse back, the secret will never show up again. That's security, okay? So make sure to copy the secret right now after your creation and make sure to store it very safely. And then, so we had the app registration, we have the certificate or the secret. You also can do the certificate, but it's easier for our demos right now to use the secret. And the next thing is we need to configure permissions for our Azure app registrations. I already did that. So how it looks like, you want to add permissions. You select here the MS Graph and you select the delegate or the application permission. In our case, we want those application permissions. And what you saw in the documentation, we need those permissions, user read write all. If you search for that, you put it in there, you see it's already selected because I already added, but that's the permission you need to add to those Azure App Registration before using it. Okay, so make sure if you want a PowerShell script or Azure App Registration to update a user, you need to make sure to add those 3 permissions. For our example, for our demo today, we created one Azure App Registration with all permissions. So we have examples to create and update users. We have examples to create a team. And we have an example to send an email. And we have an example to create a new to-do in my Microsoft to-do list. In best practice or in your environment, please create different Azure App Registrations for different services or for different purpose. So no in on-premise language, no domain user with everything. Different Azure App Registrations with different permissions. So maybe one Azure App Registrations to manipulate users, one Azure App Registrations to manipulate teams, one to send email, and one to create to-dos. Least privileges, yeah. So, but as I said, for our demo today, we created one Azure App Registration. Okay, so we have created our Azure App Registration. We have added a secret, and we added the API permissions. Every information you need is here at the learn-microsoft.com Graph API documentation. Okay, and we need a patch and the users. So now head over to the code. What I do here is before the session to not enter here my client ID in secret, so you can copy it and use it. I just have to store it in XML and load it in here. So that's no magic or something happening in the background. I just stored my credentials safely to not have it on the screen right now. So what I do here is fill out those values or variables. And the first part is the authentication. So that's every time the same. It depends if you have application permissions or delegate permissions. We see that in example 5. But in this case, that's the thing to authenticate and to build the header with the beta token. So OAuth and so on. So everything needs to be secure. So let's execute that. And now in the headers variable is everything we need to talk to the cloud. So what we do first is what we've done before in the Graph Explorer to read Jasmine's information. So the URL is graphmicrosoft.com v1 users jasminhoffmeister@automator.com. So what we had before in the Graph Explorer, and we need the header and we need the method get. So we read something. Press F8. And the result is the same we saw in the Graph Explorer. We see the job title is very bad and the mobile phone is not so good. Okay, now we want to update Jasmine's information. What we need to do is, if you put or patch, if you want to write something to a REST API, to a cloud, to a Graph API, in 99% you need to add those information in a body statement in JSON format. Okay, that's why we talked before a few minutes. You need to use or learn JSON. Okay, in our case, this is the body. We want to update the job title and we want to update the mobile phone. Don't be afraid, that number will not exist, at least not in our environment. So try to call it, maybe there's someone nice behind, but it will not exist, or it should not exist. So that's the body, and that's the same we do on line 29. With the difference, we do method patch, so we want to update something, and we need to provide the body variable. That's it. Press F8. No error. So in most cases, you do not get any response, any particular response, just no error. Then it is good. So let's execute that again. And we should see now the job title is customer manager and the telephone number or mobile number is updated. So that was the easy way to update user details in Azure. For example, that is mostly used if you have an HR system to store all your company details for company, mail, departments, title, and you want to synchronize that to your Azure AD, use that. Okay. A group. In our case, we want to just see that URL in the learn. We want to add Jasmine to a group called Cloudeight. So we see that learn article, and that's the thing. We want to add members. So we need the permission group member read write, group read write all, and directory read write all. I already did that in the Azure App registration, so we don't take a look on this. We do then a post, okay, and the URL is groups, the group ID. So before we do this, we need to get the group ID of Cloudeight and members and $ref. And the body should have that information, the ID of the user we want to put in that group. So let's see. I need to double check if Jasmine is not already a member of this group from prior testings. Cloudeight and members. I think she is still a member, so we want to remove her. Yes. Okay, so Cloudeight group is, it will take some time and it now is lost. Let's get back here. So first thing, the same we did before, we get all our credential and client ID and secret and so on. We do the authentication. That's the same we do before. We fill the headers with all the information. So we have the group name Cloudeight. And as I said, the target URL is the group ID and then the members. So we need to get the group ID from Cloudeight. So we need to do a get to get all the groups and then do a where object group name to get the ID. Okay, that's it, plus F8. And behind the group ID should then be the group ID. So this can be used for our final URL. And as you saw before in the learn article, groups, group ID members ref, need to escape the $sign in PowerShell code. And that's the body. And that's the user ID of Jasmine. I did that before. You can also get this from the Graph API. And if you click F8, no error, no response. That's very good. switch back to here, and Jasmine should be in a few seconds. Sometimes takes a few seconds. Let's reload. Yeah, let's see a little bit later, but it should be in that group. Next example, we want to send an email. That's a very common or maybe often used case, because right now a lot of applications need to send email. A lot of users want to send automatic emails from any automations or something like this. Usually right now you do it with SMTP. Okay, so usually you have an hybrid Exchange server. You have an SMTP, maybe without any authentication, anonymous send, and so send out your emails. Not good. Besides that, if you do not have a local Exchange or hybrid, so cloud only, in 1 week, the basic out is deprecated, finally. So you can't use Office 365, send mail with PowerShell or whatever you do with the PowerShell model and basic out. It will not work anymore. So switch over to Graph API. Also, if you want to do this, check the Learn article from Microsoft. Let's see. So we want to send an email with Graph API. We need the application permission mail sent, and we need to do a post from me send mail or from the user's ID send mail. Okay. And of course, we need to add a body with the message, the recipients, attachments, whatever. We have a simple example. And now I need to switch that to the half. Let me see. So that we see the result. And here is my Outlook with an empty inbox. Yes. So what we do here, of course, we get all our credential stuff. We get the header information. And now we have the sender and the recipient. Okay, it's the same. That's okay. And now we have the send mail stuff. That is the URL, users, mail sender, send mail, what we see in the Learn article. And then we, in JSON format, we build the body and all the mail properties. So the subject is Hello World from Microsoft Graph API. The body is an HTML. The recipient is the variable, and save to send send items false. So you can configure if you want to have it in the send items folder. You can also add attachment, multiple attachments, BCC, CCC, recipients. Let's keep it simple for our example. Okay, and now execute that stuff. And that's a method to safely send an email with PowerShell, Graph API, and Azure App registration authentication. So that's the way it should be, latest in 1 week. Okay, so Hello World from Graph API, a formatted text, and so on. So that's the result. Next thing is create a teams. Why not use the Graph API to create teams, to create channels, to add managers, to add users, to send messages, everything you can do. But let's keep it simple for the beginning and create a team. Let's see the documentation for this, what we should use or do. Create a team. We need those permissions: team create, teamwork, my create all, group read write all, blah, blah, blah. And we need to do a post on Teams. So Microsoft.com, graph.microsoft.com, v1 Teams. And a little body stuff with all the information. That's it. The result is our credentials, our authentication header, that's always the same. And here it is configured. The team owner, it's me. The team name is Cloudeight. The team description, the team visibility can be public or private, and so on. So we want to create a team with description, and we want to set the owner in one batch, in one script. Okay. So first of all, we need the ID from the owner. So in some cases, you cannot use the UPN. So in that case, we need to grab the ID. So that's the first part, to grab the ID of my user. And that's the JSON body to create the team, visibility, and to set the owner. And also on the side and my Teams browser. It is this one. Okay, so I execute this one. And there should be a new team on the left side in, I want to do a countdown in 3, 2, 1, but it's already here. It is Cloudeight. We have a new team. There's a general channel that's basic. You can do all the settings of what apps should show up, what permissions, and so on. Everything can be done in that Powershell in the JSON part. And of course, if you want to manage the team, I should be the owner. Yes. Okay. So that's how you create a Microsoft Teams team with Powershell and MS Graph API. The last example for today, to create a new to-do in your Microsoft To-Do. Also take a look at, that's the wrong URL. Okay, I haven't done that here, but just use search and do. So that's what I do if someone is coming to me and asks, how can we automate those, or can you do it with PowerShell? I do MS Graph API, Microsoft To-Do, for example. And I see learn Microsoft Graph. And I see I want to create a to-do task. I want to create a task. Okay, and now I get everything. And that is the example. There is no application permission for this. So this needs to be done in the user context, in delegated permissions. Okay, that's an example. There is no application permission for that. So there's no huge admin to create to-dos in all users in your tenant. That is something you need to do with a delegated permission. And there is the task read write, and there is the post users ID to-do list task list tasks. Okay, it's a longer URL that we had before, and of course some body details. Let's head over to our Powershell script. So we get the credentials. Of course, we have now user and password, and in that case also the that's our parameters. So we want to have a list, a to-do list Cloudeight. We want a new task, a Cloudeight live demo with a body text and a due date. So let's execute that part. And this is now the header. There is a little bit different. So we have a current type password because we now send a password and the username. We have the client ID, we have the user and the password. F8. Okay, no error. And the target URL is task list ID, and then task. So before we can start, we need to get the list ID from our Cloudeight list. To see the example, we have here in our to-do a Cloudeight list. Okay. Switch back to the PowerShell. That's it. So we get the ID. F8. There should be hopefully this ID here. Yes, it is very long and cryptic. And now it is the main part. So the URL is then craftmicrosoft.com, me to-do list ID tasks. And in the body, there is the to-do details, title, importance, body, due date, time zone, and some other stuff. Let's switch over to this one to see it side by side. And there should be it's already here. So we have a new task in our to-do with a due date and all those information. That's my body text. So easily you can create to-dos in your lists, in your colleagues' lists, and synchronize from any other stuff in the to-do, in the planner, whatever you want to do. So that's it with demos right now. So let's switch back to the PowerShell point here. Of course, there are many more examples of things you can do with a Graph API. Those 5 examples we saw today are mainly the most common and the most used one, at least in my opinion, or what I do in my daily business. Of course, you can do the whole teams management. So create teams, make sure they have a name convention, configure members maybe dynamically from any AD groups, or from any other lists. Endpoint management or Intune, whatever you want to call it. We use it a lot for user onboardings or user offboardings to wipe or enroll new devices, or to read those information to sync to a global asset management tool or whatever. Email sending, what I said, don't use SMTP, don't use basic out, use Graph API if you have Office 365 in your environment to send emails. You also can do all this Azure App management and registrations and secrets and permissions with Graph API, yeah, as well. And of course, all the Azure AD user group management and so on, to sync information, to add users to groups dynamically and so on. All those things can be done with Graph API and are the most common uses. Of course, what we do not cover today, because I'm not a SharePoint type or SharePoint guy, all the SharePoint stuff to create sites, to permissions and so on, also can, some of them already can be done with Graph API. Some of those functions are coming to the Graph API. So they're doing a lot of things related to SharePoint right now, but that's it. So the end is near. If you have any questions, as I said at the beginning, just let me know in the chat. Unmute your microphone. Just let us talk. We can do it here. We can do it after the recording. If you don't want to be on the recording, that's fine. Those examples, the slides will be available soon on GitHub, on my GitHub store in events. The last thing I have to say, use MS Graph API, please. If you do automation, if you do PowerShell in Microsoft environment, in Microsoft Cloud environment, use MS Graph API. If someone asks you, can you do this blah, blah, blah with Graph, in your PowerShell script, in your automation, do not look for a PowerShell model, look if you can do it with MS Graph API, okay? And if you want to have any contact, you can do it on LinkedIn or my email address, whatever you like. And now I have to say thank you very much and enjoy your weekend. And if you have any questions, let's get out of that. So let me hear, and as I said, unmute your mic or let me know in the chat. Thank you very much and enjoy your weekend. No questions? Yes, someone is typing. Dankeschön, ebenfalls schönes Wochenende. Dankeschön.